This is Elizabeth Holmes, and this is her voice.
This is what happens when you work to change things. First they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then suddenly you change the world. We strongly believe that the future of healthcare is in empowering the individual. I am absolutely terrified of giving blood. It's the only thing in my life that I've ever been afraid of.
But wait, I forgot to tell you, that's your fake voice. Now listen to your real voice.
I came asking if they could make a finger, and our team in Arizona called us and said, "What do we do?"
Haven't you noticed the difference yet? So, listen to how she accidentally on a podcast used her natural voice, and when she realized it, quickly changed her tone to a deeper one.
I don't have, if I use typical words to describe what we're doing, it's difficult because people then associate this with conventional processes of drug analysis and development, or with any other aspect to which we might be applying our technology.
Well, there's a reason why she changes her real voice. In 2014, Elizabeth Holmes became the world's youngest self-made billionaire without any kind of inheritance. That year, the company she founded was valued at $9 billion, and she owned half of it. She went from nothing to the top of the world, becoming a billionaire, starring on magazine covers and being called the next Steve Jobs, all with a revolutionary idea. Her company, Theranos, promised to put an end to the traditional method of blood testing. But her billions overnight vanished into thin air, and investors' millions went down the drain after the whole truth was exposed. From a self-made billionaire, she ended up in court facing 11 charges. Changing her voice to a deeper tone was just one of the tricks she used to gain the trust of billionaires like Alice Walton, daughter of the founder of Walmart and the richest woman in the world, to invest millions in her company. Here's how she went from an ambitious child to a filthy rich young woman with a startup mired in fraud that fooled people far more powerful than her. Elizabeth Holmes was born February 3, 1984. At the age of 7, she tried to invent her own time machine, and at 9, she told her parents that her dream was to be a billionaire. As the hard-working student she was, she got into Stanford, one of the best universities in the world, to study chemical engineering. Stanford is known as the University of Entrepreneurs and has been the birthplace of major companies like Google, Yahoo, and even Nike. However, just like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, and Mark Zuckerberg, Elizabeth also dropped out of college in her second year to start her own business.
It became very clear to me that I was at a point where a few more classes in chemical engineering weren't necessary for what I wanted to do.
At first, her company was called Real-Time Cures, a name that was later changed to Theranos, the startup that, in the future, made her a billionaire and also put her on the defendant's bench in court. Theranos had a single goal: to change the traditional model of blood testing. Goodbye syringes, needles, and large vials. Holmes's company was born with the desire to perform several lab tests with just a finger prick and a drop of blood. The drop of blood was stored in a nanotainer or nanocontainer and then inserted into a machine called Edison, in reference to the inventor Thomas Edison, which performed a series of tests that could detect STDs, cholesterol, and even cancer. The idea was initially discredited by many, but her college dean supported her and joined the company's board. Elizabeth, at just 19 years old, worked hard with the ambition of turning her startup, which began its operations in a basement, into a billion-dollar company. To do this, she raised millions of dollars, but the question is, how? This is Silicon Valley in California, United States. Silicon Valley is the region that is home to the headquarters of the world's largest technology companies. Here you'll find Netflix, Microsoft, Adobe, among many others. Theranos, still a small company, was also here, in this place that's considered the world's greatest center of wealth creation. Tim Draper, the father of one of Holmes's childhood friends and a high-risk investor, was one of the first investors in Theranos. Elizabeth's idea was very good and disruptive for a market that moves billions every year. The traditional blood testing industry, by 2028, will move around $140 billion. And the world is full of investors looking to multiply their wealth. The famous angel investors know that investing in a company that doesn't even make a profit is very risky. However, they know that if the company succeeds, their money could grow hundreds, thousands, or even hundreds of thousands of times. For example, David Cheriton, known as the billionaire professor, invested $100,000 in Google when it was just starting out and made a fortune. He currently has an estimated net worth of $10 billion. Elizabeth, although unknown in the media, managed to raise several rounds of funding for her company. However, something important happened in 2007.
This is a day I've waited 2.5 years.
Steve Jobs launched his revolutionary and first iPhone. Elizabeth developed an obsession with the former chief executive officer of Apple. She maintained a style of clothing with a black turtleneck similar to Jobs, copied the culture of the Apple company, and had a hard-working attitude to the point of never taking vacations, just like Jobs. In addition, Elizabeth hired former employees and signed a contract with the same marketing company as Apple. And in the same year that Steve Jobs introduced the first iPhone from Apple, Theranos was already being valued at $197 million after another round of investments worth $43.2 million. 2 years later, Sunny Balwani joined Theranos to be Elizabeth Holmes's right-hand man by becoming the company's president. Balwani was already wealthy and made millions by selling his company before the dot-com bubble burst. In the same year he joined, he made a personal loan of $13 million to Theranos. But there's a detail that Balwani and Elizabeth tried to hide from everyone. Neither employees nor investors knew about their relationship. Because Elizabeth was studying Mandarin, they ended up meeting on a trip to China when she was 18, just before starting her freshman year at Stanford University. They were romantically involved and went public with their relationship in 2017. But going back a bit in the timeline, Theranos was experiencing exponential growth. In 2010, after another round of investment, the company was already valued at $1 billion. But it was only in 2013 that Holmes appeared in the eyes of the world. She signed a contract with Walgreens, the second largest pharmacy chain in the United States, to launch 42 blood sample collection centers in their stores. It was here that Elizabeth Holmes reached the peak of the mountain. She gave talks at technology, entertainment, design talks, appeared on the covers of Forbes and Fortune magazines, and attended a conference alongside former President Bill Clinton and Jack Ma. In short, she was the talk of the American media at the time. She had just become the youngest billionaire in the world, with $4.5 billion, and she managed to attract even more attention from investors eager to make more money in a company experiencing meteoric growth. The Walton family, the world's richest, invested $150 million. Former United States Secretaries of State and Defense invested $88 million together in the company. Altogether, Theranos ultimately raised approximately $700 million in investments. But one thing caused intrigue in this whole story. After all, how did Theranos' technology really work? And why did the company refuse to give details about itself even to investors? In a world surrounded by old and powerful men, Elizabeth had to use a strangely deep and low voice as a weapon to convey credibility about her company. Since its founding, Theranos created several patents, but kept its technology absolutely secret. Elizabeth Holmes's idea was that anyone could get a blood test at a pharmacy or supermarket without a doctor's consent, paying a much lower price and receiving the result in up to 15 minutes. Until, on October 15, 2015, the journalist John, with his article in the Wall Street Journal, began exposing Theranos' frauds. In an investigation that lasted almost half a year, John revealed that Theranos' laboratories were not using their technology for all the tests they offered. According to internal emails reviewed by the journal, Theranos split a blood sample into two parts. One was tested with the Edison machine and the other with traditional instruments from other companies. The two devices gave different results when testing for vitamin D, thyroid hormones, and prostate cancer. And remember, this article was published in 2015 with several Theranos machines already on the market and performing various tests on many patients. Through former employees, the American journalist also discovered that Theranos' blood analysis device could only perform a fraction of the tests it promised. At the time, Balwani, president of Theranos and Elizabeth's boyfriend, ordered that quality tests no longer be performed on the Edison machines and that only results from instruments purchased from other companies be reported. In light of all these controversies, the Food and Drug Administration, the American version of Anvisa, had approved only one of the more than 100 tests submitted by Theranos. Under pressure from the regulatory agency, the company stopped collecting blood using its own method and went back to using the traditional method, until the Food and Drug Administration gave a final word on the accuracy of Theranos' tests. Only the test for detecting herpes was allowed to continue operating. The signs of the first frauds were coming out from under the rug. Elizabeth responded, hypocrisy and tests conducted.
This is what happens when you try to make a difference. First, they think you're crazy, then confront you, and suddenly you change the world.
By now, it was clear that the excitement over the new Steve Jobs revolutionizing healthcare had become a struggle to make her technology real. The Wall Street Journal article caused a stir, and the Walgreens pharmacy chain soon announced that it would not open any new Theranos blood testing centers until the startup resolved questions about its technology. Safeway, a well-known supermarket chain in the United States, spent $350 million to build clinics in more than 800 stores to offer blood tests through the startup Theranos. However, the tests never started. The clinics ended up being used mainly for flu vaccines. Elizabeth Holmes went from heaven to hell quickly, and the fall was just beginning. But even in the face of the initial allegations of fraud, she was still convinced that her company was the future of the world, even calling her machine the iPod of health. The tension kept rising and the fraud bubble was on the verge of bursting. At the beginning of 2016, things really started to fall apart. Elizabeth and her company were banned from the laboratory testing industry for 2 years. And in June of the same year, the drugstore operator Walgreens decided to officially end its relationship with Theranos. Then, in October, the Wall Street Journal published another article showing the inconsistencies and inaccuracies in Theranos' blood tests. Many people were drawn to the company to get tests done at a much cheaper price in a convenient way and with quick results. Some received false positives or false negatives for human immunodeficiency virus, others feared they might have a new tumor, and others stopped taking their blood thinning medication. In short, a series of results were inaccurate and inconsistent. After that, a flood of civil lawsuits was filed against Theranos in federal courts. In March 2018, the United States Securities and Exchange Commission charged Theranos, Elizabeth, and Balwani with massive fraud. Elizabeth agreed to give up financial control and voting power of her company, pay a fine of $500,000, and return nearly 20 million shares of Theranos. Everything collapsed in June 2018. Elizabeth announced that she was stepping down as chief executive officer, and on the same day, 11 charges were brought against her and Balwani for fraud. In September, emails were sent to investors to inform them that the company was shutting down. The prosecutors in the trial that began in September 2021 claimed that, with no time and money, Elizabeth Holmes decided to lie. Her lawyers defended her, arguing that although Theranos eventually collapsed, failure is not a crime. Trying your best and falling short is not a crime. Holmes, in her testimony, said that Balwani abused her sexually and emotionally during their relationship. She also admitted that she added logos of some pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer to Theranos reports without authorization. With this, she intended to persuade investors that other renowned companies were supporting Theranos' technology. And in the closing arguments, the prosecutors argued that Holmes chose fraud over business failure, while the defense argued that she was building a business, not a criminal enterprise. The verdict for the 11 charges was mixed. Elizabeth was found guilty on 4 charges, 3 for wire fraud and 1 for conspiracy to defraud investors. The jury found her not guilty on 4 other charges and was unable to reach a verdict on the remaining 3 charges. Elizabeth Holmes now faces the possibility of decades in prison. Each charge carries up to 20 years in prison, a $250,000 fine and mandatory restitution to victims. For legal experts, it's very unlikely that she will spend that much time in prison. But in short, Holmes blamed her partner, Sunny Balwani, at her trial. Now at his trial, Sunny is doing the same to her.